Tonight, we're going to start off. I just saw this news during Dynamite, so I was kind of scrambling during the show. But Kim Wood passed away, and I would think that some people have probably been familiar with the name Kim Wood. He was certainly much more influential and well-known within the NFL, and especially within like the bodybuilding scene because of several companies that he was heavily involved with. But when it comes to pro wrestling, he, as many people have highlighted tonight, like a mentor to Brian Pillman, and he was in the thick of things with Brian Pillman when he was working his angle to exit WCW. And I mean, there's a whole story attached to this about what the end game was, and it was somewhat upended when he had his Humvee wreck right at the peak of this kind of this con that Pillman was running. And that was sort of an area that Kim Wood had a fascination with. He was 80 years old. He was born in Minneapolis, grew up in Illinois, and then played football at the University of Wisconsin. And he met this individual, Arthur Jones, on the bodybuilding scene when he was living in California. And Arthur Jones had started this company called Nautilus, which manufactured these bodybuilding machines that became very, very popular. And Kim Wood was sort of his right-hand man. And then when Nautilus eventually got sold, Wood started another company with one of Arthur Jones' sons, and that was called Hammer Strength, which was a company he sold off in 97. But within football circles, he was the first ever strength and conditioning coach that was hired in the NFL when the Cincinnati Bengals hired him in that role in 1975. And he stayed with the team for over 25 years through 2002. And it's because of his affiliation with the Bengals that he first came in contact with Brian Pillman. Pillman, who had played at the University of Miami of Ohio, and he was an All-American there twice. And he went undrafted in the NFL, but then he was drafted in the USFL draft, turned down an offer there, and ended up getting a free. He went to the tryouts for the Bengals, and he won himself a spot on the team, which kind of tells you like the story of Brian Pillman. He was very undersized, but a huge overachiever when it came to like the limitations he had, but winning himself a contract with the Bengals. So he ended up, he had to switch positions on the Bengals, but that's where he first meets Kim Wood. And he was, after his football career ended, I mean, he did go to the CFL briefly for the Calgary Stampeders. And then while he was in Calgary, Kim Wood was the one that steered him towards, hey, look up Stu Hart and look at this. Like, he had followed professional wrestling, knew of Stu Hart, and that's where Pillman went. And then during the second incarnation of Stampede Wrestling, that's where Pillman was one of the standouts, along with Owen Hart and Jushin Liger and Chris Benoit during that era. And Pillman went... in time, he got his deal with WCW once George Scott was out as a booker, and has his run in WCW, both as a single star teaming with Steve Austin as the Hollywood Blondes. But everything comes to a head in 1996 when his contract is coming due, and Pillman and Kim Wood have devised this scenario where he would be this loose cannon character. And it was pretty much from Brian Pillman was the one executing this. And granted, he had a lot that went into this, but generally the people that are credited as sort of the brains behind this whole concept were Kim Wood and Bruce Hart, who was Pillman's teammate in Stampede Wrestling. They teamed together there in Calgary and still had that relationship. And they were able to work things together where Pillman was able to get an actual release from WCW. And his whole goal was to get a big contract from WCW. He was not looking to go to WWF. He thought WCW was where if he got a certain level of contract, it would ensure a push at that level. He was off the top of my head, he was a $225 a year guy. And if he could double that and get a big six-figure contract, well, then he's going to be pushed like a Luger and some of the other guys that are making all that money. And that was the whole goal. And he was right on the cusp of this. He got an offer of $425,000 over 3 years. But part of the WCW deal was they had the built-in clause where every 90 days, like you can be fired basically with 3 months notice, like, you know, a lot of these WWE deals you see. And he wanted that waived because he just thought at this high of a price, I could always be on the chopping block, and he wanted a guaranteed contract, couldn't get it. And then he has the Humvee wreck, and he had been negotiating with WWF and trying to drive up his bargaining power, has the Humvee wreck, and then WWF still does sign him, and of course goes to the WWF. But Kim Wood was sort of in the midst of this whole thing, and they are trying to work everybody. And Kim Wood was somebody that just had a fascination with kind of the con side of the industry. Like he cited, this movie that was remade a few years ago with Bradley Cooper called Nightmare Alley. The original film was like a decades old film, but it was kind of the whole like con game within the circus, and this other book called The Big Con. And it's like, that's where Kim Wood was really fascinated by in the wrestling industry. And this was sort of at its apex with this Pillman character. But the last thing I'll say about this is there was this excellent book written a number of years ago by Liam O'Rourke on Brian Pillman. And I interviewed Liam O'Rourke back when the book had come out. And when asked about Kim Wood, Liam O'Rourke told us that, quote, in terms of crafting the book, Kim was invaluable. Kim was one of the first people I spoke to after I decided I was going. How do you find that so fast? Google That's research. Incredible, dude. Like, it took me like a long time tonight just to dig this interview up, and you got that in like, that's incredible, dude. That was like 10 seconds since I said Liam O'Rourke, and you have it up.
That's just an image, that's all.
That's why. Oh, that's the image I used for the interview. I thought you.
Is that right?
Oh, okay.
No,
I thought you just pulled it up on our site. I was like, that's incredible. Anyway, so he says Kim was one of the first people I spoke to after I decided I was going to seriously work on this as a project. Where I think this helped me tremendously is that since Brian's real introduction and early education to wrestling, the way it worked was through Kim Wood. I was able to get a sense of Brian's outlook on things. I remember when I spoke to Mark Madden and I was telling him what I'd done, he made a point. This is telling Liam O'Rourke, you've done this book a great service by talking to Kim Wood and talking to him first, because nobody knew Brian the way that Kim did. And Liam O'Rourke went on to say, Kim was more directly important because a lot of the plan, this being the whole WCW contract issue, a lot of that plan was Kim Wood's idea. Not the whole thing, but a good portion of it was. It was Kim's idea to work on the inside with Bischoff to kayfabe the guys, and it was ultimately Kim's suggestion to Brian to get the termination papers from Bischoff to allow him to negotiate with the WWF while he was hot. Kim was a constant sounding board and reference point, and while Brian had a lot of people he'd bounce things off, it really was only Kim and Brian that knew the end game from start to finish. And even then, as Kim said, so much of that was luck, fate, and just plain making it up as you go along. He went on to state that he thought that Dave Meltzer was especially important to Brian when it came to gauging the response from within the business as his plan gathered steam. Meltzer had told Liam O'Rourke that they would talk constantly during the period of the negotiations about what was being offered and how to play it with both sides. What Brian did, and it was brilliant, was letting a handful of important people into a certain degree, because people will let you get away with a lot so long as they think you're on the inside. But the only people that really knew the end game was Brian Pillman, Kim Wood, and Dave Meltzer. And when you consider how far he went with the character, that's a very select group of intelligent, well-informed people to collaborate with. So he was just a really interesting figure that, pro wrestling was not his primary gig. And I think like this element of the industry, it almost seems like almost a throwback to a totally different era of pro wrestling, like the con game that so many of these people, like these performers, like they were professional manipulators. And that was sort of the intrigue that I think drew Kim Wood towards pro wrestling more than just, matches or promos and stuff like that. I think it was the game that was played within the game that he really specialized in. And that was really exemplified by Brian Pillman in that period. So you can go back and hear him. We had him on The Law a long time ago doing a show about Brian Pillman, but he was featured prominently on that Dark Side of the Ring episode on Pillman from a few years ago, and really fascinating guy overall. I've heard him, many times over the years, and I always found him to be a really interesting character when it came to that side of things in the industry. January is your month to beat the price increase at the Post Wrestling Cafe. Before our regular tier jumps to $8, you have a chance to lock in the old existing price for all of 2026, but you've got to do it before February 1st. Also this month, we kick off our WWE Unreal Season 2 reviews with weekly releases covering each and every episode. We'll also be looking back at the Okada-Tanahashi feud dating back to 2012 with some of their most famous matches. Plus, Chris Jericho's A Lion's Tale will be the subject of this month's book club. All that and more is yours at postwrestlingcafe.com.